Republican parties, and Gabby here will be arguing against the program, and Mike will be arguing for and talking about its merits. So essentially, we know that the programs like within this are PRISM and within the Patriot Act. I'm not going to go through the details. We'll hear that tonight. So I'm going to give the first question to Mike. How is the seizing of phone records acceptable under the Fourth Amendment that prevents unnecessary searches and seizures?
Okay, so I guess I want to frame the entire argument today around the premise that the threats of the modern world, terrorism, post 9/11 kind of threats, are not something that necessarily can be looked at in the same lens that you can look at normal crime, normal aspects of the investigative parts of the executive branch. So when we look at something like how would we prevent another 9/11, we can't look at it in terms of catching the bad guy after the act is happening. We have to be preemptive, and we have to look at how can we stop these guys before they get a chance to hurt a single American life. And so, in that way, the only real way to do that, as the government has argued, is that you need to have more data than you might think is necessary. You need to have bulk collection of what you might think is needed, and then you can go and you can search through what many people have deemed constitutional. You can go through that body of collected information quickly and say, oh, we have this name, let's see what he's doing, who he's talking to, what he might be talking about, and suddenly you have a very quick response to any information that you might have. And that's the most effective way the government knows how to do surveillance, knows how to combat terrorism. And so when we talk about the Fourth Amendment, we have to talk about in terms not of probable cause, but we have to talk in terms of what the government calls reasonable articulatable suspicion. And so as long as they have a suspicion that they can reasonably articulate, that's enough under the government for the Fourth Amendment.
Okay, thank you. Gabby, would you like to offer a response? Yeah.
So, Mike wants to change the Fourth Amendment, apparently. We're just going to take probable cause out.
That's not in the Fourth Amendment.
So,
It's not in it.
okay. I'm pretty sure it is.
Not like that.
Or it's at least under precedent, all right? Minimum. So, we can go about changing our Bill of Rights for certain situations. Terrorism is terrible. Terrorism is something we need to figure out how to combat because clearly we're not doing our job. Clearly we're losing too many lives. But that does not mean that we can treat people who we suspect to be certain criminals differently than we treat other people who we suspect to be criminals. There's a reason that our Bill of Rights was written. There's a reason that we need probable cause. And just because a certain type of crime is different than we may have been accustomed to and is difficult to tackle does not mean that we can go about fundamentally altering our Constitution. Because, I mean, once you do that, I mean, there's really not much left.
How
Sorry. Okay.
Because I want to ask how fundamental really is what is happening in the current state. How fundamental is it really altering the Fourth Amendment? The Fourth Amendment says that it basically says you can't take personal information without a warrant and without some rationality behind it. I mean, it's two sentences. That's how it's been interpreted. And so when you're talking about phone metadata, or you're talking about email trains, you can't necessarily say that is such an invasion as to disregard all the benefits that can provide. The information that's being accessed it's anything that appears in your phone bill. So it's anything from like who's talking to who, and that's not necessarily information that a lot of people think is personal in the sense of, is it so personal that it is worth putting us at risk of terrorism?
Right, that actually leads me to another question. I mean, Gabby, people who aren't engaged in terrorist activities presumably don't have anything to fear from this program, so do you think that that's necessarily, does it make it not a big deal? Do you think that?
No, I think it is a very, very big deal. Whenever you start saying, if I'm doing something right, then I don't have to fear the government, I mean, that's sort of a very slippery slope. I mean, you only need to go back 30 years to talk about the McCarthy trials and to say, the government has persecuted people and has followed people based on a suspicion that they followed a certain political allegiance. And I know our country seems stable right now, and I know that, it seems completely unreasonable that they would do that. But when the government knows where you are every Friday at noon because you always call your mother from the coffee shop, that becomes an issue, and that, even if I'm not doing anything wrong, that becomes a very real fear. I believe that is personal information. I believe that who I call and where I am when I make those calls is very personal information, and it is not information that I want the government to have, regardless of whether I am breaking laws or not.
Mike, do you have a rebuttal?
Oh, I surely do. So, I guess, so we were talking about this earlier. We fundamentally disagree about this idea of the third-party doctrine about, so when you make a call, and I'm on Verizon, by contract, I give the rights of what I'm saying and who I'm calling to Verizon. And so then the debate really becomes, is those records, is that property of the third party, or is that property of the government, is that public domain? And I think that you can't, while that might be a real concern, you can't look at this in terms of, what could happen next? And so you have to look at it and say, what are the statutes that are in place, and what are the restrictions that are applied? And right now, there is no way for them, there is no reasonable suspicion right now that our government is doing the sort of personal attacks on people, and all we can look at is what they're actually doing right now and what they're allowed to do. And they aren't allowed to do anything wrong, and as soon as that suspicion might come up, then we can talk about it, but that's not how an effective democracy works.
Can I respond? On the third-party doctrine?
Okay.
Okay, so the thing about the third-party doctrine is it has legal precedent. There have been Supreme Court cases establishing it. I'm not going to deny that those Supreme Court cases exist. It's legal. However, those court cases were in the 70s, before cell phones were a thing, before the internet was a thing. And they're based on the idea of consent, the idea that when I give this information away, I am willingly doing so. I'm saying I give up my information. It is no longer personal. But that notion of consent doesn't really exist in today's world. I mean, I don't exactly know how I would function without a cell phone, or without Google search, or without, my phone. I don't know how I would do that, and it's not as much consent as sort of forced consent, because you need those things to function. Stop, we are not saying that. And so that legal precedent, I think, needs to be adjusted in regard to advances in technology.
Okay, so that's great. Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I would just like a 30-second closing statement from each of you. Mike, would you like to go first?
Sure. So again, I guess there are a lot of misnomers and misconceptions, and kind of a lot of dramatic dialogue that kind of surrounding this debate about what kind of the powers that the government has over us, how they're invading our lives, and how they're kind of targeting individuals against their will behind this black curtain. There's a lot of drama behind it, but when you look at what they're actually doing and what they're allowed to do, and kind of the countermeasures to prevent anything from going wrong, there is not this kind of concern of personal invasion that a lot of people talk about.
All right, Gabby.
Okay, 30 seconds is a short time. But I think everything comes back to this third-party doctrine. If you believe in it, we're all fine and dandy. If you don't believe that it exists, then what the government is doing is gaining access to your personal communications through FISA courts if you are communicating with anyone who's a foreigner who they suspect. Or if, under the current program, if basically you are suspected of terrorism, which in the past has involved every single Verizon customer, then they can monitor all of your cell phone data without a warrant, without a public, any sort of public hearings, and without regard to the Fourth Amendment. And I think that's an issue.
Okay, well, thank you both very much. Thank you guys for watching, and let us know if you have an idea for a little sparring.
All right, thank you, Mike.